Good morning, everybody. Today is the 24th of November, 2022. I feel like with these podcasts, you have to say the date because so much changes. We are interviewing today on the Stark podcast, the Canvas team. We've got Tim and Dave here from Canvas. And just as a disclosure, obviously they're building on StarkX, but we are focusing on this podcast to really get you to learn about the team and the product. So we will be interviewing you both. Do you want to just start with a bit of introduction about who you are, what you're up to?
Sure.
Dave, maybe first. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm David. I'm CEO and co-founder at Canvas. So we've been working closely with the StarkWare team to build layer 2 infrastructure for the future of finance. And prior to Canvas, my brother and I started a payment gateway company way back in 2000, early days of the internet, that we grew from a single desk in our grandmother's garage to being a global fintech serving banks all around the world. I moved to Singapore, spent some time in Singapore growing the business throughout Asia, Europe, and the US. And in 2013, we sold that business to NASDAQ-listed Euronet. So that was a really amazing journey in Web 2 and in the early days of the internet, seeing what e-commerce changed our lives. And we believe the same thing is going to happen in the Web3 space with everything that's happening around blockchains and layer 2, but it's still very, very early days. And joining on the line is Tim.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Liron, for having me as well. So hi, I'm Tim Moddel. I'm head of product and co-founder at Canvas. So prior to joining David and the team at Canvas, I was a management consultant for 20 years with various large multinational organizations doing technology and strategy consulting. And so in those roles, I saw a huge amount of oversaw and ran digital transformations in financial services and other industries, and was helping to, I guess, weed out the inefficiencies of systems and platforms as part of these large transformation projects, and had a huge passion for trying to make things better, faster, and cheaper in the way that big and small organizations can operate. And so that was where I I guess, got the love for having a single record or system of truth, and that's what then got me excited to look in blockchains and see how that can help solve a lot of problems with data and integration. And so back about 2 years ago, I had known David since some childhood days and joined together with him to build some amazing things at Canvas.
Fantastic. So most of the founders we interview are a bit younger than you guys. They're in their 20s, just out of university or out of high school. So I want to actually go back to 20 years ago for both of you guys. Can you describe like what it's like, maybe David, to start an internet company in 2000? I don't know where that was in terms of the tech bubble before, after. You obviously went through the tech bubble at any rate. How was it like talking to investors at that time? Did they know what the internet was? Can you just bring us back to your life 20 years ago?
Sure. So I worked closely with my brother. My brother is 10 years older than me, and he started the business, and I joined straight out of school, out of high school. And it was very, very different to how it is now. Now, think about a world where there's no AWS, where there's no GCP, where there's no Azure, and you actually have to spend a lot of money in order to buy physical equipment to put in a physical data center that you have to maintain and plug all the cables and make sure that it stays up and running. So we got funded. We actually had our seed round was in October of 2000. So that was the depths of the dot-com bubble crash. And really it was a pretty dark place because a lot of companies had raised a lot of money on no sustainable business models, and really they'd gone out of business. So our addressable market had shrunk significantly. It's not, it was a very, very different place from the perspective of setting up a business and what you needed to spend any capital that you raised on. We spent a lot of the money that we raised on just on physical equipment to actually be able to run the platform and the business. And so if you contrast that today, the barriers to entry are a lot lower because you can just write code, spin up AWS. AWS will give you a fortune in free credits. It's really comes down to the ability of having a really good idea and also, more importantly, being able to execute really well. So I think it's changed. I wouldn't say it's easier or harder. It's just it evolves over time. But it was definitely, I can say without a doubt, like I flew around the world putting out fires at data centers, virtual, and dealing with outages and dealing with all different kinds of things so that we could have high availability, high uptime data centers running on a global basis with low latency because we were working with banks around the world. And now, in 10 seconds and a few lines of code, you can have the same thing on AWS that we would have spent millions of dollars to develop. So it's a different place to what it is now.
Actually wild to think about that because I've never thought about that. Yeah, any startup, whatever you're doing. I mean, you were in payments even, and you still have to have like some big DevOps team dealing with literally where do these cables go in this machine? Why is this machine turning off? Wow, that is completely mind blowing. And then in terms of maybe jumping a few years for both of you, I think you also went through the global financial crisis, and maybe that was more of a financial crisis than an engineering crisis. But like, what was the world like back then? I was still in high school. Most of our listeners were probably in high school or younger.
I'll take this one. I think it was quite interesting. I've actually got a funny personal story around, or a professional context for around this that led me towards blockchain, in later years, which was actually at the time and literally around the time that Lehman Brothers collapsed. I was actually working for a large management consulting firm, doing a digital transformation on a subprime mortgage management system. And when we first went in there, I was absolutely shocked about the lack of controls and the simplicity of how these actual, subprime mortgages were being classified, managed, and then, serviced on a monthly basis, to the point that it would have been very simple for somebody to go in there and make a couple of changes with very few controls, no immutability on transactional data or the actual balances, etc. Which then, when all these different organizations sort of fell over, it was certainly no surprise, given the insight that I'd had at the time about how these sort of very complex products were being managed or not managed with a sufficient level of rigor to really protect the ultimate investors who were buying these products. And so, rolling forward a few years later and seeing, Bitcoin and Ethereum and the potential of what this technology could achieve to provide, sort of a distributed database effectively that allows you to and everyone to have a single source of truth, was something that was, very powerful when I first sort of looked into it. And I reflect back now, and it definitely was one of the real reasons that it forced me to drive down that rabbit hole of blockchain and where I am today. But yeah,
It almost reminds us of exactly what went on with FTX 2 weeks ago, just poor operational controls. It's, I guess
definitely.
that leads me a bit to a meta question. Like, do you think this is just like human psychology, these boom and bust cycles? We just have these cycles of greed. We do take shortcuts. We overextend ourselves. Like, I'm just thinking, 2000, 2001 tech, 2008 global financial crisis. We're going through what we're going now with the almost inevitable recession. What is it? Is it like human psychology? Is it the Fed? What do you guys think? Like, how does the world look like? Is this like just like coded into mankind?
I think there's a couple of dimensions and there's a couple of factors that are at play at the same time. You've got, if you look back at 2000 and the dot-com bubble, it's really the technology cycle. It's a young technology. The internet was super young and super basic when it first came out. Like, there was, what could you do in the early days of the internet? You could do email, and then you had intranets, you had AOL, you had closed loop systems, and it really grew over time to be what it is today. But the fact of where we've got mobile devices with high-speed internet, like that's been a 20-year plus evolution. So really what you see at that time, everyone gets really excited about the potential, but the actuals and actually having a business that is a sustainable business model that generates revenue and can fund itself organically, as opposed to having to go out to the market to constantly raise capital. So that's a big part of it. And I think that's what we're seeing now with Web3 as well. And we're seeing just in the blockchain space, there has to be a sustainable business model in order for growth to actually happen once the froth and the excitement goes away. That's the technology cycle side. The other side is the macro side and what's happening with the world and what was the response to COVID and how governments enacted financial policy in order to stop us all running into situations like the Great Depression. So there's a lot of things that have come together at the same time, and I really focus on technology, and I'm a geek and I love technology. And I think where we are in the blockchain technology cycle, it's as excited as we all are on this call and probably watching. We think we've come a long way, but it's still very, like everyone says it, it's very, very early. So if you think about using blockchain and digital assets to rewrite finance and rewrite other areas of society, that is just like the internet. That's a 20-year journey, and we're only 5, 6, 7 years into it. So it's still very, very early.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think also for technology, there's endless potential. Like the marginal use case costs nothing once you got the infrastructure set up. So you can get these booms and busts. Okay, I want to transition, and this will transition more to what you're doing today. But you both have decades of history of working with organizations, with institutions, with retailers, with small businesses to take on digital transformations. And obviously, there's a lot of hesitance on their part. Either like, oh, why do we need this? Everything works as great as it is now. Can you like just describe any learnings you've had from the past few decades of doing that? Like, what do you think are like the biggest challenges with getting existing entities to move over to a new digital platform that improves their lives so much better?
However long you think it's going to take, times it by 7 to 10. And that will be the actual duration that it's going to take. It's dealing with, it's a very, very different proposition to go to an established enterprise or organization and say, we want to change something. And there can be all the improvements that you want, but you have to respect that the people that are making that decision they have a personal stake and they have like real skin in the game, that if it succeeds, maybe they'll get some praise, but if it fails, it's a serious, serious issue. And so it's a big challenge, and you have to be very respectful of the organization of both of the people and the organization. And so it's really, if you come into it with a mindset of saying it's going to happen tomorrow, and even though I've got great technology, it's obvious this should just be done straight away, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. And so it's really about having patience and being able to have the staying power in the space to actually get to that end goal.
And Tim, yeah, you go, please.
I'd add to that. I think number one, to what Dave said, stakeholder management. Any large digital transformation, when you're moving from 0 to 1, it's going to take time and patience, and making sure that you align all the major stakeholders involved to ensure that everyone is on board and deal with the change management aspect is a much greater challenge than the technology challenge in every case, whether it be core finance systems, customer relationship systems, or blockchain now. So I think that's a key point. But then the other part is to look at starting the journey with a couple of small victories and trying, rather than doing a big bang implementation, how can you break it down into smaller, proof of concepts to then get the buy-in to then show what the ultimate change can be, rather than trying to devour the entire project in one go and potentially have it either succeed or fail.
It makes sense. There are often a lot of layers here. Like each individual employee has their like end of year bonus that they're reaching out for, and they don't want to break systems. But then you might have some smaller groups inside the company that are happy to take big bets. Definitely, I see that. Um, and I think sometimes people don't really understand the problem. So I want to transition to crypto now. How did you both discover crypto? You mentioned you Canvas was born roughly 2 years ago. How did you discover crypto? What did you initially think? What problems did you think it was solving when you discovered it? And yeah.
So I'll go. I saw Bitcoin in 2013, and at that time, uh, my brother and I were running a payment gateway, and I looked at it and I said to my brother, "This has the potential to replace Visa and Mastercard as a payments mechanism. You have never before had a network where you could send a payment, you could send value from one person to another with no intermediary at decent speed and at low cost. It was so profound. It was like a real aha moment. And I really thought that, and I still do, that not necessarily Bitcoin as a payment mechanism, but as an underlying technology, seemed very clear to me the potential of blockchain technology to really disrupt finance and many other areas. But I did appreciate, I thought, wow, it's going to be a long road, but here you've got a genesis, you've got a spark, you've got a really, it's like when you first downloaded a song, or when you first used streaming and you got instant gratification. You just thought, wow, this is going to be massive. The first time I saw BTC, that's how I felt.
So before I go to Tim, were you thinking back then about stable coins, KYC, or it was just like that will come later?
Oh no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I think about what it looked like back then. It was just Silk Road. It was, and that was like, that was everyone's. That was the only context that Bitcoin was being discussed in, and that, like, if you're in the space, I was in the payment space, and I thought, okay, you can extract that, and you can separate those two, because cash is used for bad things as well. But really, right, me looking at, as a geek, as a tech guy, I thought, wow, that's the new and shiny thing. I want to play with that. I want to spend a lot of time playing with that.
And you, Tim?
Yeah, similar. I sort of first heard about Bitcoin, I guess, for its more nefarious reasons rather than anything else, with Silk Road and the like. But then really started to dig into the technology probably a year or two after David, but fell down that rabbit hole quite quickly, and just seeing the power of having decentralized, gold, money, whatever you wanted to call it, payment mechanism. And then Ethereum came along, and kind of took me a little bit of a while to get my head around it, and had a friend who was building something in the space, and that turned out to be one of the early DeFi apps that, when I saw that happen then, and sort of how smart contracts was going to revolutionize finance and, the way we interact and transact on a global basis, that was the absolutely mind-blowing moment for me, to see that you could, mint a stable coin and have it, collateralized and backed, and this entire ecosystem that could develop off the back of what Ethereum built. And that was when I knew that this was going to have to be part of my future in some way, shape, or form.
All right, great. So let's just transition into Canvas, what you're trying to do there based on these blockchain building blocks. Yeah, so like you mentioned DeFi on Ethereum. Where does Canvas come into the picture there? What are the products? What's the vision? What are you trying to build?
Sure. So we fundamentally believe that over time, all assets will be tokenized, all value will be tokenized, and billions of users that are not in blockchain today will be accessing DeFi-powered products under the hood, or they'll be using financial products and services that are powered by DeFi, and they might not even know it. And so what's really necessary in order to kickstart that next wave of adoption? Where are those billions of users? They're in traditional finance. They're in Web2 companies. They're in fintech companies. And what's important for them is they need infrastructure. They need really simple APIs and SDKs in order to allow them to roll out these services to their customers. And as you move into more regulated environments, and I think regulation we have to accept is going to come in this post-FTX world, there's important things to happen around the space of compliance and confidentiality that are going to be needed in order for certain use cases. And so our goal is to build that compliant confidentiality layer for Ethereum and the infrastructure that's needed in order to service the needs of these companies that are bringing their users into the space.
Let me just double click on one thing you said. You said all assets will be tokenized and you're very confident that happening in the future. Why? Let's say I'm a guy in my 60s, I live in my house, you're telling me my real estate's being tokenized. Next time I sell it, I'm like sending an NFT to the buyer. Why?
Well, it's more efficient. So if you think about the way that assets trade today and what is necessary in order to, say, settle a trade, and what's necessary to move funds from one counterparty to another, there's a lot of disparate systems that are involved, and there's middlemen and intermediaries that have been put in place specifically to ensure that trades settle, just because two parties can't trust each other. And that creates a lot of friction, delays, and cost that can be stripped out with tokenization. So make no mistake, this is a long, long journey, but it's going to happen. The numbers that you hear that are coming out of BCG and HSBC and other studies, they're saying that it's 27 trillion, huge numbers, trillions of dollars over the next 10 years will move to blockchain-based structures because it's better, faster, and cheaper and more efficient to run platforms that are using blockchain underneath the hood as opposed to traditional systems. But it's a very long journey. But what it means is that it's going to get cheaper to run, and it's also going to create new opportunities to do different things that you otherwise weren't able to do before. Things that all three of us and people that are watching, you're using DeFi and you consider using Aave and putting an asset into Aave and taking out a loan instantly. You take it for granted, but none of that is available in traditional finance. And I think what you'll see and what's made possible through tokenization is that next leg that you can start doing new things that were not otherwise possible.
So, like, maybe from your pure commerce days, can you just describe the friction in the existing system? Like, if I'm sending, I don't exactly know what you were doing back then, but it's like an international bank transfer from Australia to America takes a few days, right? And I think it's not just like anti-money laundering checks and KYC checks. There's actual like friction in the technology, and that the blockchain can come and solve that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To send money internationally has to be done via SWIFT, which is a 30-year-old system, and it's really not designed for high-speed payments, and it really comes from a place where there wasn't really an alternative. And now, if you think about when you swipe your credit card, or when you tap your Visa, or you tap your Apple Pay or your Google Pay, you get an instant approval and you can leave the supermarket with your shopping. But what happens behind the scenes, there's so many steps of going from the credit card machine to the bank that's provided the credit card facilities, going to Visa and MasterCard, getting it to the counterparty bank and getting the approval. And then that's just for the messaging. And then at the end of the day, actually moving funds, there's so many steps along the way that that slow down the process and introduce risk. There's a huge issue with international payments just getting to the wrong place and getting rejected or being lost. And none of that exists in blockchain. You can send directly. I can send you an asset. I can send you stablecoin or whatever value it may be, instant, and it's at an extremely low cost. And so that's really where, in the payment space in particular, you haven't really seen blockchain take off as such. It's still very early in terms of like person-to-person payments, but it's going to happen. It might not. It will evolve in different ways. But if you think about what is the potential for sending payments from one person to another with instant speed and at very low cost, that's an extremely powerful and exciting primitive. If you think about what are the alternatives today, you've got Visa and MasterCard, you've got Swift, or even you have fintechs that allow you to move money internationally at high speed, but they have to have a huge amount of capital tied up all around the world in order to facilitate that.
Okay, I want to just make sure. I assume some of the listeners for this part of the podcast might be less familiar with blockchain and this whole world. So I want to maybe play a bit of devil's advocate and see what your responses are. So some people will say we need to live in a regulated world. We need to make sure that the tax office knows what I'm doing with my money so I can pay the right taxes, that I'm not sending money to sanctioned entities. And apparently blockchains are open, permissionless, and public, and that can never be prevented. How do you respond to that?
I think if you consider the way that the traditional finance works right now, there is a huge amount of control and there's laws around monitoring for bad things that happen with money, and rightfully so. Anti-money laundering, counterterrorism funding, drugs, like really bad stuff. That rightfully so, there should be monitoring of transactions to stop. And so when you have a blockchain-based structure, it really creates a ledger that allows for a view of payments that are happening in a system. I don't think that necessarily changes the profile of the movement of money, because the transaction monitoring that is in place already exists today when you're sending money from your bank account. It's just a matter of how long it takes to be monitored. So this is a really dynamic space, and there's a lot of opinions. Of course, I'm probably amongst these listeners there'd be a huge range of opinions and how they'd want to, what they consider to be, what should be private, what should be public. I think what you'll see and evolve over time is compliant confidentiality that evolves on top of public networks. So you still have the benefit of using a public permissionless network, but then there is the ability to have still confidentiality of your transactions or privacy of your transactions, but still fulfilling the requirements to have oversight by authorized parties of, which could be government, could be regulators, and whether you agree with that they should be seeing transactions is it's a personal opinion, or it's for one to decide. But really, the way that we view that blockchain will evolve is still having a public ledger, still having some transactions that can be open, but there will be an ability to have some level of confidentiality and privacy, which you'd expect with using, like as you do with your bank account. If I send you money, you can't see everything that I've ever done on my bank account, but still having that level of oversight that is necessary to comply with global laws.
Okay, so I want to Tim, go.
I'd add to that as well. Like, you mentioned that people say nefarious activity, it's facilitating nefarious activity and all these other horrible things. I think I'd flip it around and say that, it is one of the most sort of easily traceable and clearly transparent technologies to actually facilitate transfer of let's say assets or payments or stable coins, whatever is the case, between two parties. And yes, there's going to be areas of regulation and confidentiality that get built into these protocols. But I think that it's removing a lot of the black economy rather than facilitating the black economy. It's really helping try and solve what has existed within cash-based economies for a long time. And the more that we move to this, the more easy it's going to be for us as society to eradicate some of these really horrible things out of our lives.
I think back to the FTX. Firstly, when they paused withdrawals, within an hour, Twitter was saying, "Hey, look, the FTX wallets are no longer sending any money to users." You would never have that in the traditional world. So there's a transparency that you don't have in the traditional system. And then there was that rogue employee, it looks like, who on the Saturday night stole a few $100 million of funds. And in real time, everybody's monitoring, hey, he just sent some funds from Kraken. We can KYC him. Hey, he's dumping his Ethereum. He's selling his Bitcoin. And you just don't get that transparency in the traditional world. You mentioned this idea of still having a confidentiality layer. So you have this layer 2 on top of the base layer where people can transact. Those individual transactions are not exposed to the Ethereum blockchain. I want you to just maybe spend a few minutes explaining this and trying to maybe imagine that I'm some non-blockchain native listener. Can I understand this? What's going on?
Sure. Tim, do you want to go or shall I?
I'm happy for you to go, and I can add around the edges at the end.
Yeah. Okay. So if I send you a bank transfer now, it sounds ludicrous for me to say that you can see everything that I've ever done on my bank account, everything that I've bought since the history of me opening that bank account. And that's exactly how it is on blockchain today. And that the beauty of having an open ledger is actually, it's a double-edged sword. So if you're sending from one wallet to another, you can see the complete transaction history, and from that point before and from that point onwards. So what we think about is from a payments perspective, that doesn't really work. And so when we think about having some level of confidentiality, we can use what the blockchain was intended for, which is to provide a very secure layer in order to have your assets. But then when we start moving into layer 2, we can move transactions to do some transactions in an environment where it's off-chain and it's essentially in a compliant, confidential, away from layer 1, but we're still holding those transactions, those history, in order to satisfy what would be necessary in terms of disclosure. So really thinking about having all the benefits of having a public, decentralized open ledger, but having an ability to do some transactions with confidentiality.
I think likening it, David, to what SSL did for e-commerce, in the fact that, until the open, sort of when SSL was allowed to be embedded in browsers and could be used by everyone, I think, the challenge with e-commerce was it was all running in the clear, and all the security concerns and risks associated with that. And when that amazing technology came along, finally people could confidently put their credit card online and know that they weren't going to end up with fraudulent transactions or other sort of risks of being able to interact online. And so I really see that solving this confidentiality piece in a compliant way is really, really important to help move the space forward and find that sort of correct medium between allowing the regulators to be able to see and oversee to ensure that there isn't any kind of nefarious activity or wrongdoing happening, but at the same time give the users the privacy that they want to be able to transact on these public systems.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you think about what kicked off the e-commerce boom, it was the introduction of SSL. And when SSL came in, it was actually categorized in the same as biological weapons by the US. And so it was a journey to actually get approval to have SSL as part of the browser. But that encryption layer that got made available really was allowed what kicked off the e-commerce boom. That was the key enabler to what we take for granted today, where you can swipe on your phone and order anything. And so coming back to what we were talking about before, it's really early and it's a very, very complicated issue to satisfy for a lot of different perspectives. And it's not going to satisfy everyone. But what's clear is that if you have these capabilities in place, we believe that over time, it will allow much more usage and allow us to grow the space and bring in much more adoption than what's in the space right now.
Makes total sense. I think when Mark Andreessen created SSL or productized it, the NSA called him over, and there was some big outburst there. But yeah, you would not be able to have credit card payments today without that. Okay, so following up on what you were saying, like, what does Canvas look like in 10 years? Assuming regulators are friendly towards this whole space. What's the vision? Are people like literally using Canvas as their bank? What products are they doing on this platform? What are they not doing on this platform? Where do you think things are heading?
I think the way that our vision is that we're essentially providing the network and the backbone and the infrastructure that's connecting a lot of different participants on this shared ledger and bringing them into being able to transact with each other on Ethereum, on a public blockchain like Ethereum, but with having confidentiality, low cost transactions, and high speed and certainty that is provided, can only be provided when you're working in a layer 2 on a public network. And so what's our vision? That there's billions of users around the world that are using mobile phones to do various different things. It could be financial, it could be social, it could be a range of different things. And they are accessing products that are powered underneath the hood by DeFi and by smart contracts. And we see as that is the real growth that will happen over the course of years ahead. And Canvas, we're building the simple APIs and SDKs that will be allowing the various participants to plug into this network and very quickly and easily run various different products on our network.
Sounds like a great vision. Many listeners will be concerned. The past 12 months, we've seen Celsius fail with their lending platform. Genesis has just come out with big struggles. We had the Luna collapse. We had 3 Arrows Capital collapsing. FTX just now went bankrupt with roughly $10 billion of user funds. Isn't this just a broken industry? Like why wouldn't people prefer to do all of these DeFi or these financial activities off the blockchain? Why do they want to be doing this on this blockchain when this whole industry is just failure after failure in the past 12 months?
I'd be careful to paint the whole industry with the sort of negativity of those different events. Like if we break that down a little bit more, the Celsius, FTX, those types of businesses were just a failure of trust. People were depositing assets in there that, especially with FTX, where the terms of service were saying that they wouldn't be lent out or sort of the assets that I provided to FTX were my own. And FTX chose to use that as their, sort of funds to fund Alameda and other activities, which is a complete breach of the trust that I, as a customer, might have had in them to manage and hold my assets securely. And similarly with Celsius and some of the lending activities happening there. And unfortunately, that's then led to the contagion effects of Genesis and others that, in this very fast-moving industry with such a high degree of transparency, liquidations happen, incredibly quickly. And so even if someone might have been doing the right thing and sort of doing loans that seem to be with appropriate due diligence and counterparty checks, the situation can change so quickly that those loans suddenly become underwater and you can't liquidate the collateral quickly enough. So I think it all started with the loss of trust for FTX and for Celsius. And then for Luna, I think, unfortunately, putting aside the personalities involved in this situation, it was a poor design of the actual mechanics of the way that Luna and UST worked. And, if you would have looked in the early days of a project like Synthetics, there was very clear reason why when you're minting a collateralized stablecoin that you do that with more than, just a one-to-one backing. Then when Synthetics first launched, it had, I think, a 700% collateralization, so 7 times the value of SNX needed to then, mint one synthetic USD stablecoin. And so when you take off the guardrails and try and, sort of stimulate a protocol by making it a lot easier to, sort of YOLO your money in and kind of get a great return, these things are going to happen. So I think we need to be really careful that as an industry, it's about educating users and retail and businesses to make sure that they know what they're getting into. And so, as a result of all of these things, regulation is surely coming, and it was already coming, and now it's going to be coming even faster. And I think that that's really positive net for the industry, because I think, it will help to weed out the bad actors or those people that we shouldn't trust with our funds, and will really get people to do their education before they put assets into any of these services.
I think that the biggest battle I've had in the past few months is explaining to people outside of the blockchain industry that, like, the failure of FTX, the failure of Celsius, the failure of Three Arrows Capital was not a failure of, like, blockchain or digital assets. It was just a violation of trust, the same way that you had it with Madoff, the same way that you had it with the traditional system. If anything, all of these collapses just prove the value of having a transparent, permissionless, open system. And for people outside of the industry, they don't really differentiate between the two worlds. They think Celsius is DeFi, but it's not. It's traditional CeFi, really.
No, and it's fraud. Let's call it for what it was. It's fraud. It's fraud, and it's human nature, and it's greed. And it's the same thing, like, to your point, it's no different to Bernie Madoff. And the fundamental difference that when you have blockchain and when you have layer 2 like StarkX is that it's a clear cube of glass. It's crystal clear glass to see exactly what's within the platform, and there's no ability for the operator to do anything with the user funds without their permission. And that's fundamentally what happened with FTX. And, like, think about if you're a pilot, how can you fly a plane safely if you can't trust your instruments to show you the correct altitude? If you're looking at your balance on a centralized exchange on a beautiful app, it doesn't matter how beautiful the app is, but if the numbers are just completely fake, how can you trust that? You can't. You're set up to fail. And that's what's happened here. It's a failure of centralized technology. And really what it really shows now is that everything, and it validates what we've believed since the beginning, is that if you are self-custody, that you have your keys and you're working with a platform that gives you complete transparency about all of the assets that are held within the platform, and that the operator can't do anything with those funds without your permission. And critically, if the operator decides to close, that you can still withdraw your funds, so you're not reliant on them to remain, that the pretty website or the pretty app is still running, that you can still at any point go to the contract on Ethereum and withdraw your funds. That's where we need to be. And that's how none of these exchanges, none of these recent failures had that ability. And that's the situation is horrific for everyone that lost. It's really bad. And it's put really unfortunate pollution on the entire industry. And we've got to do a lot of work and education to come back from this. Like it's really easy for the entire industry to be tarred with this brush and to just say, no, look, you had your chance, you blew it. And I think the silver lining is, and really the thing we have to look towards is saying, okay, we have to continue on, and really these are the solutions that we can do to stop these things happening in the future. And now you're seeing the start of it with the proof of reserves from the centralized exchanges, which is a good step, but it needs to really go the whole way of seeing a full picture of assets, liabilities, and just fundamentally having everything on chain and being transparent and having control over the funds, or at least knowing what the other side is able to do.
I think this is time for decentralized finance to shine. It has already looked through this whole last 6 months from the minute Celsius collapsed through to 3AC and everything that's tumbled since. DeFi, Aave, Uniswap, all of these protocols have operated, absolutely flawlessly. And so now it's really about allowing people to utilize these really innovative and amazing technologies in a much more simple way to simplify the on-ramps and to make it accessible to the next billion people. And so that's really what we're trying to achieve with Canvas, is to bring that digital economy to that next wave of users. And, they may not know that their loan that they're getting is powered by Aave under the hood, but that's the promise that we see that DeFi can bring when you open that up to the masses.
I'm sold. I'm like, my head's hurting from nodding in agreement. Because I think what we've done so well in this last segment is identify the problems with the centralized world that this blockchain world comes to solve. And I think people who are not blockchain native love to hear what problems the blockchain is coming to solve, what problems Canvas is coming to solve. And we just really summarize it so well in those past few minutes. So just to conclude, where can people keep up to date with what you're doing? Where can they find you? Where can they learn more?
Sure. You can check out our website, canvas.co. There's a content section on our website. You can follow us on socials, on Twitter, and on Medium. And we're always happy for people to follow us and go along with us on the journey.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dave and Tim, for your time. We'll include all those links in the show notes. And looking forward to you bringing the future of finance to billions of people.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Liron.
Bye.
Thanks, Liron.